Why is it so difficult to speak honestly about women today? Modern discourse swings wildly between two extremes, blind devotion and bitter resentment. We either hear women praised as morally superior and emotionally divine, or condemned in shallow, reactionary terms. But somewhere in the middle, between worship and hatred, truth has gone missing. Over a century ago, the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer confronted this same imbalance with a clarity that still makes people uncomfortable today. He didn't write to flatter, and certainly not to please. He wrote to expose, to strip away illusion, no matter how sacred or sentimental, and to uncover what lies beneath the cultural masks. While most of his contemporaries avoided the subject, or coated it in romantic ideals, Schopenhauer approached the topic of women with brutal frankness. He saw through the idealized image that society had built of the gentle, nurturing woman, elevated above base desire and untouched by the will to power. To him, this was not truth. It was performance, and the performance had a purpose. It kept men blind to the deeper realities of nature. Realities that had nothing to do with morality or fairness, and everything to do with survival. Schopenhauer believed that the relationship between men and women was not shaped by mutual admiration or love in the poetic sense, but by biological necessity, and more importantly, by instinctual conflict. Men were driven by the desire to conquer, to leave behind a legacy, to build and expand. Women, on the other hand, were shaped by the need for protection, security, and above all, the continuation of the species. In his view, what we call love is simply a refined trick played by nature, a delusion designed to lure men and women together for the sake of reproduction. It feels profound, but it's merely functional, a biological trap, a fleeting illusion dressed up in poetry. Schopenhauer didn't suggest this was evil. He simply pointed out that it wasn't noble. It wasn't what we wanted it to be. And to continue believing that love is something pure, spiritual, or transcendent is to participate in a collective fantasy. What disturbed him most wasn't the instincts themselves, but the lies we wrap around them. We tell ourselves that we choose our partners based on virtue or connection, but what we're really choosing, often unconsciously, is youth, health, strength, status, and security, reproductive value, not moral character. Men imagine they love women for their softness, their beauty, their innocence, but Schopenhauer saw this not as admiration, but as projection. Men fall in love not with the woman herself, but with an image that fulfills his psychological and physical needs. The woman becomes a symbol, not a person, a figure of comfort, not complexity. And in that act of idealization, the truth of her nature is lost. Schopenhauer's insight was that women are not these elevated moral beings society wants to believe in, nor are they inherently inferior. They are, like men, agents of instinct. But where men pursue dominance and legacy, women pursue stability and survival. Their strategies differ, but their goals are the same: to secure their place in a world that is indifferent to sentiment. This is why Schopenhauer saw women not as powerless, but as masters of indirect power. When barred from direct control, from politics, wealth, or warfare, they adapted. Through charm, emotion, suggestion, and beauty, they developed ways to influence without confrontation. And that influence, he argued, was often more effective than brute strength. But men, blind to this quiet power, continued to believe in the fantasy. They called it love. They mistook instinct for connection, strategy for sweetness, and self-preservation for virtue. And when the illusion eventually broke, when the real woman appeared beneath the mask, they felt betrayed, not because the woman had changed, but because their fantasy had collapsed. Schopenhauer saw this as a tragedy, not for women, but for truth. He didn't hate women, he despised illusions, and few illusions are more persistent or more protected than the one that says women are morally superior, selfless, and untainted by the darker impulses that drive all of nature. Arthur. Schopenhauer didn't believe that men and women were misunderstood simply because of social structures or historical injustices. He believed they were misunderstood because no one dared to speak honestly about nature, and nature for him was never romantic. Where others saw love, he saw strategy. Where others saw harmony, he saw tension. And where most saw gender as a matter of personality or preference, Schopenhauer saw a biological conflict, two fundamentally different forces drawn together not by shared vision or emotional connection, but by evolutionary necessity. To him, men and women were not two parts of the same whole. They were rivals in the continuation of the species, partners, yes, but unwilling ones, each trying, often unconsciously, to secure their own advantage in a system that cares only for reproduction, not happiness. Men, he argued, are driven by the will to conquer, create, and leave a legacy. Their desire to build empires, invent tools, fight battles, and write history is not just ego. It is the manifestation of a deeper urge to leave something behind that outlives them. The drive for achievement is not noble. It is restlessness, born from the knowledge that their time is short and that significance must be earned. But this restless drive comes with a cost. Men are rarely satisfied. They are haunted by ambition, tortured by comparison, and rarely find peace in the present. Fulfillment always lies just beyond reach, in the next goal, the next conquest, the next symbol of power. Women, in Schopenhauer's view, are different. Their drive is not outward, but inward. Not toward greatness, but toward preservation. Their instincts are not concerned with legacy, but with security, with what can be kept, not what can be created. He believed that women, being closer to nature and reproduction, are more attuned to the practical and the immediate. While men chase glory, women look for stability. While men gamble their lives on ideas or ambitions, women seek what is safe, certain, and beneficial in the short term. This difference, he claimed, is not superficial. It defines nearly every aspect of human interaction. It shapes love, marriage, family, and even the structure of civilization. A man is willing to sacrifice comfort, time, and even his health for the sake of vision. A woman, on the other hand, is far less likely to chase an uncertain dream, not because she lacks imagination, but because her biological priority is rooted in continuity, not conquest. Schopenhauer believed this is why women are often more content with what is. They don't suffer the same existential dissatisfaction as men because they are more grounded in the body, in the present, and in the tangible. Men dream, women survive. He didn't view this as a flaw. He saw it as an evolutionary strategy, and in many ways, a more effective one. While men sacrifice everything for greatness and often die forgotten, women ensure that life continues. They are the mechanism of continuity, not disruption. The anchor, not the wind. This contrast creates a fundamental tension. Men seek meaning, women seek safety. These desires are not aligned. They are opposed, and yet they are bound together by the biological contract of reproduction. Nature, indifferent to comfort or fairness, forces these two instincts into contact. And that contact, Schopenhauer believed, is what we call love. But make no mistake, love is not unity. It is conflict, disguised as attraction. In the eyes of the philosopher, women do not enter relationships seeking enlightenment or transcendence. They enter seeking security, protection, and advantage. Not out of malice, but out of nature. And men, blinded by the illusion of romance, believe they are being chosen for who they are, when in reality they are being measured for what they offer: status, strength, safety. This is why Schopenhauer considered female affection to be instinctive, not intellectual. Not a choice made after deep reflection, but a calculation based on unconscious needs. When a woman finds a man attractive, it is rarely because of his ideas. It is because he appears able to provide, to defend, to preserve her and her offspring. It's not about the man. It's about what the man represents. And yet, men continue to misinterpret this. They believe they are loved for their soul, their vision, their goodness. Schopenhauer saw this as the great male delusion, the belief in romantic sincerity when the reality is a biological contract with symbolic clothing. He believed that women excel in the art of emotional persuasion, not because they are manipulative, but because they had to be. Denied formal power for most of history, they developed more subtle tools: charm, seduction, softness, guilt, vulnerability. These became their weapons, not to hurt, but to navigate. But that navigation often leads to control. Quiet control. Invisible control. Control that works not through confrontation, but through emotional leverage. And men, unaware of what drives their own desire, often surrender willingly. They call it love. They call it romance. But what it often becomes is dependency, a man giving up his ambition in exchange for comfort, and a woman securing what she needs, not by force, but by suggestion. This is not equality. This is not even cooperation. It is instinctive negotiation, and Schopenhauer believed that denying it is what keeps both sexes locked in frustration and illusion. Schopenhauer believed that human beings, despite all their pride in reason, are not guided by truth. They are guided by appearance, not by what is, but by what seems to be. And in no realm is this more evident, he argued, than in the relationship between men and women. In his view, women denied access to physical strength, political power, or institutional control evolved a different strategy, one that was far more effective in a world governed by perception: the power to influence through illusion. He didn't mean illusion in the sense of deception, but in the strategic use of appearance. In a society that judged women by how they looked and behaved, by youth, beauty, grace, modesty, those who wanted to survive, and more importantly to secure protection, learned to master these traits. Schopenhauer saw this not as vanity, but as biological adaptation. Just as animals develop camouflage, women develop the capacity to read what others needed to see and to become it, and society, willfully blind, mistook this capacity for sincerity. It rewarded those who could embody virtue, purity, softness, not because they were those things, but because they knew how to perform them. This, he believed, was not weakness. On the contrary, it was a form of power so refined, so invisible, that most men never even knew it was being used on them. A man might dominate the battlefield or the boardroom, but a woman, with a single glance, a carefully placed word, or a well-measured silence, could shift the direction of his choices without ever appearing to interfere. She could mold his actions, not by command, but by inviting the illusion that it was his idea all along. And in that ability, Schopenhauer saw something that society refused to acknowledge: the rule of the surface over the substance. While men fought to build the world, women learned how to shape the men who built it, not by direct opposition, but by emotional strategy, not with force, but with symbolism. In this, Schopenhauer saw a certain cruelty, not in women, but in nature itself. Women were not being manipulative for the sake of control. They were following the path nature had given them. In a world where survival depends on securing a man's resources and loyalty, of course, women learned how to signal value, provoke desire, and leverage their image. Beauty, then, became currency. Grace became armor. Innocence became performance. But performance, when repeated for long enough, becomes indistinguishable from identity. And the world, fooled by its own desire to believe in feminine virtue, placed women on pedestals they never asked for, and women, recognizing the advantage, climbed up willingly. Schopenhauer warned that this pedestal was not a sign of respect. It was a mutual delusion. Men believed in the ideal because it softened their view of a harsh world. Women maintained the ideal because it provided power in an otherwise powerless position. Both participated, both benefited, and both suffered for it. He believed that many men fall in love not with women themselves, but with what women represent: purity, salvation, emotional security. They fall in love with an idea, and when reality arrives, they mistake truth for betrayal. Women, Schopenhauer claimed, rarely destroy this illusion, because the illusion works in their favor. They allow men to believe what they want so long, as it serves mutual interests. This isn't manipulation, it's survival through performance. And that performance doesn't end at the individual level. It seeps into culture, politics, relationships, and morality. Entire societies are shaped not by what women do in public, but by what they guide from behind closed doors, through influence, not legislation, through image, not ideology. Schopenhauer didn't frame this as some sinister conspiracy. He framed it as instinct elevated to art, a form of control that doesn't look like control. A mastery of the surface so complete that it renders the substance irrelevant. He believed this power was overlooked precisely because it was quiet, because it didn't challenge authority with noise, it redirected it with silence. Because it didn't break rules, it bent expectations. In a world where men are obsessed with being, women mastered the art of appearing. And in that difference lies an entire history of influence disguised as passivity, domination disguised as charm. To Schopenhauer, the final tragedy is this: while men build their identities around what they can do, women build theirs around how they are perceived. And in a world obsessed with image, the latter often has more sway. That, he argued, is not weakness. That is biological genius. For Schopenhauer, love, that cherished ideal celebrated in poetry, novels, and human imagination, was not a noble union of souls. It was a biological trap. A clever illusion created not to bring happiness, but to serve the cold, mechanical aims of nature. He argued that what we call falling in love is nothing more than the will to life expressing itself through us, without our consent and often against our own interests. We are not choosing love. We are being used by a force older and stronger than reason. Attraction, in his view, is instinct dressed in poetry. We're told that we fall in love because of compatibility, shared values, or destiny, but Schopenhauer stripped away all of that and asked a much simpler question: what is love actually for? His answer? Reproduction. Nothing more, nothing less. He believed that men are drawn to youth and beauty not because of personal taste, but because these are biological indicators of fertility. Likewise, women seek strength, status, and security, not because they admire those traits in the abstract, but because they provide protection and stability essential for raising offspring. None of this is conscious. That's what makes it so effective. We're not supposed to realize that nature is pulling the strings. We are meant to believe in love, to fight for it, suffer for it, even die for it, all while unknowingly serving a purpose that has nothing to do with our fulfillment and everything to do with the continuation of the species. This was, to Schopenhauer, the cosmic joke, that we are tricked into believing we're pursuing meaning, when in reality we're participating in a cycle of breeding and self-delusion. He wrote that people believe love will make them whole, give them peace, or bring transcendence, but that is only because we cannot see the truth clearly while under its spell. Love clouds judgment, it hijacks the will, it overrides logic, even identity, and by the time it fades, as it always does, we are often left wondering who we were when it all began. Schopenhauer saw this pattern play out across all relationships. An initial obsession, followed by confusion, disappointment, and in many cases, resentment. Why? Because once the biological mission is completed, once the instinct is satisfied, the illusion collapses. The traits that once seemed divine now feel irritating. The bond that felt eternal becomes a burden, but to him, this wasn't a flaw. Of love, it was its function. Love is meant to burn hot and die fast. It's meant to lure us into procreation, then dissolve when no longer needed. That's why so many relationships feel like betrayal after the passion fades. Not because someone changed, but because the program ended. What most people call forever was never meant to be forever. It was designed by nature to last just long enough. Even the emotional pain of heartbreak, Schopenhauer argued, is not spiritual. It is biological punishment, the withdrawal symptoms of instinct, a desperate protest from the body and mind when the illusion of unity is broken and the real self must return to isolation. He viewed this with a kind of brutal clarity. Love is not about you. It's about life itself, using you to perpetuate its own aim. Men delude themselves into thinking that they've chosen wisely, that the woman they adore is a product of refined taste or deep compatibility. But in reality, he argued, she was chosen by the man's instinct, a subconscious selection based on the imagined perfection of their potential offspring. That's what the attraction is for. Not the present, but the possible child. And women, just the same, gravitate toward men who can provide, protect, and offer strength. Not because of romance, but because instinct demands it. Her unconscious is not asking, do I love him? It is asking, can he give me and my child what we need? Neither side is truly free. That's why, for Schopenhauer, the entire institution of romantic idealism is tragic. We build our dreams on top of illusions and then wonder why they fall apart. We expect permanence from something that was designed to be temporary. We confuse chemical necessity for spiritual connection. And when the illusion fades, as it always does, we are left disillusioned. Or worse, married, tied down, or broken by something that was never what it appeared to be. But Schopenhauer wasn't cynical just for the sake of being cruel. He believed that once we understand this truth, once we stop projecting transcendence onto a biological transaction, we gain something incredibly rare: freedom. Freedom from expectation, freedom from self-deception, freedom from blaming the other for the crash of a fantasy we chose to believe in. Only then can we begin to see love, if it still exists after that clarity, for what it truly is. Not salvation, but strategy. Not eternal union, but temporary purpose. Not destiny, but design. Schopenhauer never wrote to comfort, he wrote to expose. And when it came to love, women, and human relationships, he stripped away every layer of fantasy to reveal the raw engine beneath: instinct, survival, and the will to life. What we call love is not divine. It is biological necessity, dressed in poetry and lies. What we call harmony is not balance. It is tension managed through performance. And what we call equality is not sameness, but a refusal to confront difference. To live clearly, Schopenhauer believed we must stop chasing illusions, because truth, no matter how brutal, is always better than a beautiful lie. See you in the next video.